All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We take a look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern, and try to hold your hand and help you to figure out how to use these things in your own life. Many of these theories of everything are esoteric and obscure and somewhat difficult. So we try to, parse them out and, help you out with kind of, going through it the hard way and help you to maybe avoid some of the pitfalls that maybe I had to encounter going through them. And we feel like if you can understand these theories of everything, they will help you out with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview. And today is our 562nd video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey Bernard Larson. And Mr. Larson was an American engineer who lived out in the Portland area, although he was born in North Dakota. He lived from 1898 until 1990. In 1959, he proposed his two fundamental postulates about how he believed the universe operated. Larson was one of the rare scientists who proposed a cosmology based on motion. The universe is not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy, not made out of force. It is made out of motion. And there have been others who have said that, but they were not able to kind of turn it into a generalized theory because they did not redefine motion. In Larson's system, motion is the relationship between space and time. It sets up a generalized reciprocal relationship between space and time. All of our scientific quantities are forms of motion. Not only speed and acceleration, but also matter, energy, force, pressure, capacitance, electric charge, power. These things are all forms of motion, and they can all be expressed in fractions, with space or time as the numerator, and time or space as the denominator, with the idea that space and time can have multiple exponents. So you can have, 3 dimensions of time or 2 dimensions of space or both. And, matter is time to the third over space to the third. Pressure is time over space to the fourth. Force is time over space to the second. Capacitance is space to the third over time, and so on and so forth. And so Larson sets up his system this way. From there, he derived a theoretical universe about how he believed the universe would look if his postulates were correct. And he compared his theoretical universe with the so-called actual or empirical universe of modern science that they had arrived at through laboratory and observatory work and compiled in their scientific tables. And in many cases, Larson is able to recreate scientific tables or come close to recreating scientific tables just from theory. And Larson has books on physics and astrophysics and chemistry and astronomy. But he also has a book on metaphysics that gets into philosophy, religion, psychology, and biology. And he has 2 books on economics. One is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity, and that's the one that we're reading today. We are in chapter 17 of that book. It's called The Dollar Abroad. We'll be finishing that chapter today and then moving into chapter 18 on wartime economics today. Larson's, ideas in economics extend from his ideas in the scientific field. He sees economics as really a form of science and is quite upset about the state of the economic discipline and rails against the ideas of what he calls sociological economics that are attempting to impose their philosophical, ideological, political viewpoints on economics. Larson likens the economic mechanism to a bridge or a building. That is, that you have to construct your economic mechanism based on the laws of physics, not on your personal preference. And then once it does comply with the laws of physics, then you can worry about your personal preferences. So Larson sees the economic mechanism as a form of motion, as an economic system in motion. And his reciprocal aspects, like the space and time of his economic system, are production and consumption. And he has many kind of aphoristic, different principles, economic principles, such as number 2, only goods can pay for goods, which I guess is a little bit of an extension of Say's law. The amount of production creates the exact amount of goods that's needed to basically clear the market. So if you'd like to get more of a description of the reciprocal system in general, you probably want to watch any or many of my first 474 videos on this subject, wherein I basically explain the reciprocal system in 474 different ways. If you would like to understand the economics from the front, from the first chapter, go back about 6 weeks in the archives, because we're right in chapter 17. So you can probably just listen in fresh here, and Larson will probably explain most of the things as we go through. But if you want to be real thorough about it, you want to go, start from the beginning. Okay, now we're going to try to finish this chapter here on the dollar abroad, and then move into the chapter on wartime economics. Okay, but the reduction in business and employment, even in those cases where it does not reach recession proportions, is a very high price to pay for holding inflation down. For example, Heilbronner and Thoreau report that the tight money policy in the United States from 1979 to 1982 about doubled unemployment, while bankruptcies soared to levels that had not been experienced since the Great Depression. Meanwhile, the convulsions in the American economy dislocated economic relations throughout the world. Use of this costly and destructive method of dealing with the American inflation problem is based on two premises. One, that it is the only effective means of controlling inflation, and two, that its results justify its high cost. According to the findings of this work, neither of these assumptions is valid, but in any event, the foreign nations get no benefit at all to offset the damage that the American actions inflict on international, financial, and commercial relations. Measures taken to control inflation in the United States have no direct effect on inflation in other countries. Cost inflation is a worldwide phenomenon of a continuing nature because workers everywhere are striving to improve their standard of living. And since few of them realize that the average standard of living is totally dependent on the productivity of the economy, it appears to them that the road to a better life is through higher money wages, a belief that is reinforced by the fact that those workers who receive earlier and larger increases do benefit at the expense of the rest of the workforce. Unless the economy of a nation has some built-in resistance to the pressure that the workers are exerting, the tendency of the respective governments is to follow policies that cause, or at least permit, continuing wage increases, which are promptly followed by the inevitable price increases, leading to further demands for higher wages, and so on. The wage price spiral, as it is called. The rates of inflation vary widely, often reaching annual levels of over 100% in some countries. As pointed out in Chapter 13, cost inflation is a balanced process and does not change the relation of production price to market price. It therefore has no direct adverse effect on the general operation of the economy. And when arrangements are made to soften the impact of the indirect effects of economic life of the community, is able to continue in somewhere near a normal manner. This is another of the aspects of inflation that the economists have found it hard to explain. The surprising fact indeed, say Samuelson and Nordhaus, is that economies with 200% annual inflation manage to perform so well. The variations in the exchange rates take care of the differences in the amount of inflation in the different countries. The value of the currency of a nation that is experiencing a high rate of inflation falls relative to that of a nation with a lower inflation rate. Thus, inflation in these countries does not necessarily create inequities in economic relations between nations. What the prevailing American anti-inflation policies are doing internationally is subjecting foreign nations to a substantial part of the cost of economic actions that are actually detrimental to them rather than beneficial. The effects of our domestic economic policies on the rest of the world that have been discussed in the foregoing pages raise some questions about the ethics of international relations that are beyond the scope of this work. It is appropriate to point out, however, that the existing mismatch between costs and benefits cannot continue indefinitely. Unless the United States institutes some changes to reduce the detrimental effects of the prevailing policies, the international community will undoubtedly replace the dollar sooner or later with some other internationally accepted currency. And of course, this is a little bit, prescient. Larson died in 1990, so he's writing this in the 1980s. And Now, here in 2024, we have the BRICS nations beginning to propose another internationally accepted currency that will replace the dollar. And so many of these things are coming to pass as we speak. That is the end of chapter 17 on the dollar abroad. And now we're going into chapter 18 called Wartime Economics, which hopefully isn't also prescient and talking about current events. Most of us hope that history will record World War II as the last global armed conflict on this planet, but it is generally conceded that this hope is still far too nebulous to justify discontinuing physical preparation for meeting an attack. And presumably, the same policy of preparedness should apply in the economic field. Furthermore, if we never have the same kind of an emergency again, a study of the experiences and the mistakes in handling the economy in wartime, when many of the normal economic problems are encountered in greatly exaggerated forms, should provide us with some information that will be helpful in application to the less severe manifestations of the same problems in normal life. In undertaking a brief survey of the effects of large-scale war on the national economy, the first point that should be noted is that no nation has ever been in the position of having anywhere near enough productive capacity in reserve to meet the requirements of a major war. In all cases, it has been necessary to divert a very substantial part of the civilian productive capacity to military production, in addition to whatever new capacity could be brought into being. We can get a general idea of the magnitude of this diversion during World War II by analyzing the employment statistics, inasmuch as the available evidence indicates that the average productive efficiency in civilian industries during the war period was not substantially different from that of the immediate pre-war years. There are some gains in productivity under wartime conditions because most producers are operating at full capacity and without the necessity of catering to all of the preferences of the consumers. But these are offset by the deterioration in the quality of the labor available to the civilian industries, the handicaps due to the lack of normal supplies of equipment and repair parts, and the very outstanding change in the attitude of the employees toward any pressure for efficiency. No accurate measurement of the relative productivities is available, but for an approximate value which will serve our present purposes, it should be satisfactory to assume a continuation of the pre-war level of productivity, in which case a comparison based on employment reflects the relative volumes of production. In 1943, which was the peak year from the standpoint of the percentage of the total national product devoted to war purposes, the total labor force was approximately 60 million, and of this total, the Commerce Department estimates that there were 28 million workers engaged on war activities, including war production. From the same source, we get an estimate that the spending for war purposes in 1943 was approximately 45% of the total national product, which agrees with the labor statistics within the margin of accuracy that can be attributed to the two estimates. Subtracting the 28 million workers from the total of 60 million, we find that there were about 32 million workers engaged on the production of civilian goods. Hours of work were somewhat above normal. No exact figures are available, as we cannot distinguish between war work and non-war work in the data at hand, and it is likely that the reported average working hours are heavily weighted by overtime work in the war production industries, but an estimate of 10% above normal would not be very far out of line. On this basis, the civilian labor force, for purposes of comparison with pre-war figures, was the equivalent of about 35 million full-time workers. In 1940, before the war, there were 45 million workers employed. The decrease in civilian employment from 1940 to 1943 was 22%. We therefore arrive at the conclusion that the production of civilian goods dropped more than 20% because of the diversion of effort to war production, in spite of all of the expedients that were employed to expand the labor force. But this does not tell the whole story. In addition to the 45 million workers employed in 1940, there were another 8 million who should have been employed, a relic of the Great Depression that still haunted the economy. If the war had broken out in a time of prosperity, the drop in civilian workers would have been from 53 million to an equivalent of 35 million, or 34%. We thus face the possibility, that in the event of another major war, we may have to cut the production of civilian goods by as much as 1/3. The significance of these figures is that there must be a reduction of the standard of living during a major war. A part of the production necessary to feed the war machine can be provided by discontinuing new capital additions and postponing maintenance and replacement of existing facilities. All this was done in World War II. Construction of new houses and manufacture of automobiles, home appliances, and the like were kept to a bare minimum, while those items in these categories that were already in existence were visibly going downhill throughout the war years. But such expedients are not adequate to offset a 20% reduction in the civilian workforce, to say nothing of a 35% reduction if that becomes necessary. There must be a general lowering of civilian consumption. The nation's citizens have to go without the products that would have been produced by the efforts of the 10 to 18 million workers that are diverted to war production. All this is entirely independent of the methods that are employed in financing the war effort. Today's wars can be fought only with the ammunition that is available today. No financial juggling can enable us to make any use today of the war material that will not be produced until tomorrow. If our nation or any other enters into a major war, then during the war period, the citizens of that nation as a whole must reduce their standard of living. As the popular saying goes, it cannot be guns and butter, it must be guns or butter. A correlation to this principle is that if any economic group succeeds in maintaining or improving its standard of living during wartime, some other group or the public at large must carry an extra burden. The labor union which demands that its take-home pay keep pace with the cost of living is in effect demanding that its members be exempted from the necessity of contributing to the war effort, and that their share of the cost be assessed against someone else. Similarly, the owner of equity capital who is permitted to earn abnormally high profits during the war period because of an inflationary price rise is thereby allowed to transfer his share of the war burden to other segments of the economy. The most serious indictment that can be made of the management of the U.S. economy during World War II is that it allowed some portions of the population to escape the war burden entirely, while others had to carry a double load. To many of the favored individuals, particularly those engaged on urgent war production, where the pay scales were set high to facilitate the recruitment of labor, and where cost plus and other extremely liberal forms of compensation were the order of the day for the employers. The war period was a time of unparalleled prosperity, and there is a widespread tendency on the part of superficial observers to regard this era as one of general prosperity. Quote, why should it take a major war to lift us out of a depression and into prosperity? We are often asked by those who share this viewpoint. But surely no one who attempts to look at the situation in its entirety can believe for a minute that the nation as a whole makes economic gains during a major war. Everyone knows full well that war is an extremely expensive undertaking. While we are thus engaged, we do not save, we do not prosper. The conflict not only swallows up all of our surplus production over and above living requirements, but also takes a heavy toll on our accumulated wealth. Even though the United States did not suffer the deliberate destruction by bombing and shelling that was the lot of those nations unfortunate enough to be located in the actual theaters of war, our material wealth decreased drastically. The so-called war prosperity was simply an illusion created by government credit operations and the discriminatory policies that deal out individual prosperity to some merely increase the cost that has to be met by others. Approximately 1/3 of the income received in the later years of the war was nothing but hot air. It had no tangible basis, and it could not be used except when and as it was made good by levying upon the taxpayers for real values to replace the false. The disposable personal income in 1943, according to official financial statistics, was $134 billion. But the increase in the national debt during the same period was $58 billion, exclusive of the increase in outstanding currency, which is part of the debt but not included in the statistics. Inasmuch as the income recipients are also debtors, their true income, aside from the currency transactions and any debt increase in local governmental units, was the difference between these two figures, or $76 billion, not the $134 billion that the individual members of the public thought that they received. Anyone can understand that the money which he personally borrows from the bank is not part of his income. That which the government borrows on his behalf has no different status. The additional $58 billion of so-called income created through credit transactions was purely an illusion. And the addition of this amount to the national income statistics did not increase the ability of the people of the nation to buy goods either in 1943 or at any other time. The only thing that this fictitious credit-created income did or can accomplish is to raise prices. There is an unfortunate tendency among economists and laymen alike to look upon government bonds outstanding in the hands of the public as an asset to the national economy, an accumulation of savings which constitutes a fund of purchasing power available for buying the products of industry. This fallacy was very much in evidence in the forecasts of the economic trends that could be expected after the close of World War II. The National Association of Manufacturers, for instance, commented with satisfaction on the large amount of unused buying power in the form of government bonds that would be available for the purchase of goods after the war. Alvin Hansen took the same attitude with regard to governmental obligations in general. Quote, the widespread ownership of public debt, this vast reserve of liquid assets, he said, constitutes a powerful line of defense against any serious recession. End quote. But government bonds were not and are not unused buying power. nor are they a reserve of liquid assets. On the contrary, they are very much used buying power, and they are not assets. In the post-war case cited by Hansen, the buying power which they represent had been used for airplanes, tanks, guns, ships, and all of the other paraphernalia needed to carry on modern warfare, and it could not be used again. All that was left was the promise of the government that in due course it would tax one segment of the public to return this money to another group. It is nothing short of absurd to treat evidences of national debt as assets. The only assets we have outside of the land itself are the goods currently produced and the tangible wealth that has been accumulated out of past production. Government bonds are not wealth. They are merely claims against future production. And the more bonds we have outstanding, the more claims there are against the same production. In order to satisfy those claims, the workers of the future will have to give up some of the products of their labors and turn them over to the bondholders. There is no magic by which the debt can be settled in any other way. It can, of course, be repudiated either totally by a flat refusal to pay, or partially by causing or permitting inflation of the price level. But if the debt is to be paid, the only way in which the bondholders can realize any value from the bonds, it can only be paid at the expense of the taxpayers and consumers. Regardless of what financial sleight of hand tricks are attempted, the day of reckoning can be postponed only so long as the creditors can be persuaded to hold pieces of paper instead of tangible assets. When the showdown comes and they insist on exercising their claims, the goods that they receive must come out of the products that would otherwise be shared by workers and suppliers of capital services. If this diversion is not done through taxes, it will be done by inflation. It cannot be avoided. Okay, we're going to stop right there for today and resume this chapter tomorrow when we come back. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.